I have told this story only once before, to my foreman Ike Prude on the night of my wedding, and even then I told it badly, skipping the parts that showed me in a poor light, which is to say most of it. Ike listened and then poured himself another 2 fingers and said, "Gid, you are the stubbornest man alive, and the Lord had to drag you to happiness like a mule that won't cross a creek." I told him that was uncharitable. He said it was the truest thing he'd ever spoken. I have had 8 years to turn it over, and I believe now he was right. So here it is, told proper. The autumn Clara Voss came to my gate. I had been alone on the Broken Kettle for 3 years and 2 months. My wife Ruth had died of fever in the October of '78, and the grief of it had settled into me like alkali in creek bottom, not sharp anymore, just present, flavoring everything. I kept the cattle. I kept the house. I paid Ike and 2 other hands, and I worked alongside them from first light to last because work was the only thing that reliably kept me from sitting in the kitchen with a bottle and thinking about Ruth's chair, which still stood at the table in the place where she'd always sat. I was not a broken man, I want to be clear on that. I ran my operation clean, I paid my debts on time, I sat on the county water board and voted sensibly. I shaved every Sunday. I was functional. I was just closed. The way a line shack is functional in summer when nobody needs it. Solid, weatherproof, 4 walls and a roof, and nothing living inside. That October evening, I was riding the south fence line checking for washouts from the previous week's hard rain when I saw them on the road. The road that runs past the Broken Kettle's south gate is the only road into Harrow crossing from the desert side, 20 miles of nothing before it, alkali flats and scrub juniper, and a dry wash that ran water twice a year. People did not walk that road. Nobody with anywhere to be walked it. There were 3 of them. A woman in a gray wool coat that had seen better decades, carrying a bundle on one arm. 2 children walking beside her, one of maybe 8 or 9 years, the other small enough that I couldn't tell much in the failing light except that it was a child who was very tired. They were moving west toward Harrow Crossing. They had another 4 miles to go, and the light was going fast. I watched from the fence line. I will confess that. I sat my horse at 50 yards and I watched them for a full minute because some part of me was already calculating the cost of stopping. I knew the cost. Not money, I had enough of that, but the other cost. The opening up of something I'd worked 3 years to keep sealed. The small one stumbled. The woman, the mother, caught the child's arm before there was a fall, but in catching it she dropped the bundle she was carrying, and several things scattered on the road. She crouched in the gravel and gathered them up without a word of complaint or distress, just methodically picked them up one by one, while the older child took the smaller one's hand. 3 people who had learned not to expect the road to be anything but hard. I rode to the gate. She heard the horse and straightened, and she looked at me with the expression of a woman who has had to read strangers fast, whether they meant help or harm, and how quickly she'd need to move. She was younger than I'd taken her for at distance. Dark circles under pale eyes. A mouth set firm. She had the particular stillness of someone who has spent the last portion of their strength and is measuring what remains. "Evening," I said. "Evening," she said. She didn't ask for anything, she just waited. I looked at the children. The older one was a girl, dark-haired, watching me with her mother's same measuring look. The small one was a boy, maybe 5, and he was not looking at me at all. He was leaning against his mother's leg with his eyes half shut. "You walking to Harrow Crossing?" I said. It wasn't a question. "We are," she said. 4 miles yet." "I know it." I looked at the boy again. "He eat today." A pause, just a breath. "This morning," she said. I got down from my horse. I walked to the gate and opened it. "Come in off the road," I said. "My cook will have something on." She didn't move immediately. She was looking at me the way a person looks at a thing they want badly and do not trust. "We're not charity cases," she said. The words came out level, no apology in them, no anger either. "I know it," I said. "My name's Gideon Holt. I own the Broken Kettle. You're walking past my property at supper time and I've got a cook who makes too much. That's the full extent of it." She looked at the gate. She looked at her boy. She picked him up. He was heavier than she'd expected, or she was weaker than she'd expected because she steadied herself before she walked through. "Clara Voss," she said, "this is my daughter Nettie and my son James." "Halt," I said again, and closed the gate behind them. I want to tell you I was purely charitable that evening, a good neighbor who fed some travelers and sent them on. That is not entirely what happened. What happened is that Tomas, my cook, fed the children a real supper, beans and salt pork and cornbread, and James ate with the single-minded ferocity of a child who has not been full in some time. Nettie ate more carefully, watching her mother, watching me. Clara ate last and least, the way a mother eats when she is not sure where the next meal comes from. I sat across the table and drank my coffee and didn't look at them more than I had to. But I listened. Tomas asked where they'd come from, the way Tomas asked everything cheerfully, as if curiosity were a service he was providing. They had come from the Voss claim, 22 miles back east. Her husband Elias Voss had taken a lease on 40 acres of irrigated ground from a man named Cutter 3 years previous. He'd worked it well, by all accounts, paid his lease on time. Then in August he'd taken a fall from a hay wagon, bad landing, head against a post, and he had not woken from it. He had died on a Tuesday in the heat of August, and by the end of September Cutter's men had come with a paper saying the lease reverted on the death of the primary leaseholder, and Clara had 30 days to vacate. She'd spent those 30 days writing to her husband's brother in Prescott, who did not write back, writing to her own sister in Albuquerque, who wrote back but could not take 3 people in, selling what could be sold, and then walking. She told this to Tomas without inflection, as if it were someone else's account. The kind of telling that means you have held it back so long that the feeling has gone underground, and what's left is just the facts, stripped clean. James had fallen asleep in his chair by the end of it. Nettie was watching her mother. I looked at the boy sleeping. He had cornbread crumbs on his chin. He was breathing the slow, trustful breathing of a child who has eaten and is warm. "The hired hands' quarters are empty," I said. "We finished the fall gather last week and my extra men moved on. It's a room and a half clean wood stove. You can have it tonight." Clara looked at me, and tomorrow, she said, "we'll move on." "That's your business," I said. She held my eye for a moment, reading me again, the way she'd done at the gate. Then she nodded. I carried James to the quarters myself. He didn't wake. Nettie walked beside me with the bundle her mother had gathered from the road, carrying it like it was the most important thing in the world, because it was. She was still there a week later. I won't pretend that was entirely her doing. The first morning, Tomas had gone to check on them before breakfast and had come back to tell me the boy had a cough. A cough, in October in that country, was nothing to be careless with. I'd had Ruth's illness start as a cough, so I had told Tomas to take them breakfast and let them be until the cough resolved. The cough was a small thing, 4 days, and James was running around the yard making nuisances of himself in the way of healthy 5-year-old boys. But by then Nettie had found the kitchen garden and started weeding it with a diligence that made Tomas feel guilty for letting it go, and Clara had, without being asked, without being invited, walked into the main house and cleaned it. Not dusted, cleaned. The kind of cleaning that requires moving furniture and beating rugs and washing windows and getting to the things behind the things. I came in from the south pasture on the 4th day, and the kitchen smelled of lye soap, and the curtains were down from the windows being washed, and my dead wife's dishes, which I had put away in a trunk and not touched in 3 years, were back in the cupboard, clean, placed with care. I stood in the kitchen and looked at those dishes and I felt something break loose in my chest. Not pain exactly, more like a slab of river ice going out in spring, the noise of it, the sudden movement. "I found them in the storage room," Clara said from the doorway. She was wiping her hands on her apron. She read my face and something shifted in hers. "I'm sorry. I should have asked." "No," I said. I looked away from the dishes. "They were Ruth's, my wife's. They ought to be used." A silence. "Then was it recent?" "3 years," I said. "October." She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say she understood or that time heals. She just stood there for a moment in the quiet way of a woman who knows what grief is and knows there is nothing useful to say to it, and then she went back to whatever she'd been doing. I sat down at the table at Ruth's end, the end I'd been leaving empty, and I drank my coffee in a kitchen that smelled clean and looked lived in, and I could not have told you if that felt like a wound or a remedy. The week became 2, the 2 became 3. It was not a formal arrangement. I had not hired her. She had not asked to stay. What had happened was a series of small facts that accumulated without my noticing. James was over his cough, but Nettie had caught it next. Then Clara herself ran a mild fever for 2 days that I was not going to let go unmonitored. The kitchen garden was coming in better than it had in 2 years. The main house was cleaner than it had been since Ruth. Tomas, who had been talking about his sister in Flagstaff and the possibility of going to her for the winter, had stopped talking about his sister in Flagstaff. And the children were in my yard. That is the thing I had not calculated. I had calculated food and firewood and the use of the quarters, and whether Clara's presence was a net cost or a net benefit on the running of the house. I had not calculated James. He was everywhere. He had found every gap in every fence and every loose board on every outbuilding, and he followed Ike Pruitt around the yard with a devotion that made Ike, a childless man of 50 who expressed affection by gruffness alone, visibly uncomfortable and secretly pleased. Nettie was different. Nettie was careful. She helped in the kitchen, she kept James from breaking things, she did what was asked without being asked twice. But she watched me, the same measuring look her mother used, waiting, I thought, to see what kind of man I was. I did not know, then, what I was supposed to do with that. One evening in the 3rd week I came in from the north pasture late. A heifer had gotten through the fence, and it had taken me and Ike 2 hours in failing light to sort it out. And I found the kitchen lit, and supper on the stove, and James asleep again in the armchair by the fire. Nettie was at the table with a slate, working figures. Clara was at the counter with her back to me. "You don't need to cook," I said. "That's Tomas's job." "Tomas had a tooth pulled today in Harrow Crossing," she said, without turning around. "He's lying down." I had forgotten. I sat down at the table, and Nettie looked up from her slate and then back down. "What are you working?" I asked. She showed me. She was doing long division with a confidence that surprised me, clean notation, carrying her numbers right. "Mama's been teaching me," she said. "Your mother taught you ciphering?" "Yes. She says a woman who can't do her own accounts is a woman at the mercy of men who can." She said it with the gravity of a child repeating wisdom she has absorbed but not yet fully understood. I looked across the kitchen at Clara, who still had her back to me, and I felt something I had not felt in 3 years. It was not desire, not yet, or not only. It was a kind of recognition. The sense of a mind in that room that worked the same way mine did, a person who thought things through and made decisions from the thinking and was not ashamed of it. "She's right," I said. Nettie looked at me again. The measuring look, but different now, a little warmer. It was Ike who said it, in the blunt way Ike said everything. 4th week. He and I were mending the north fence, the hard November wind cutting down off the mesa, and he said without looking up from the wire, "You going to offer her a proper position or just let this drift?" "It's not drifting," I said. "What is it then?" I didn't answer. I knew what it was. It was me avoiding a decision because making the decision meant saying a thing aloud, and saying it aloud meant it was real, and if it was real then something was changing, and if something was changing then Ruth's October was getting further away. She's got nowhere permanent, Ike said. Woman that capable, somebody in Harrow Crossing's going to offer her work before long. Saloon's looking for a cook. Widow Trent's been after a housekeeper since spring. The thought of Clara Voss working at the saloon landed in my chest like a stone in still water. I did not examine why. She has the children, I said. Saloon won't take the children, Ike said. Widow Trent might. James and Nettie are useful ages. She's not sending her children to work for Widow Trent. Ike looked at me, said nothing, went back to the wire. I worked beside him for 10 more minutes. The wind came down off the mesa and the November cold settled in. I thought about the clean kitchen. I thought about Nettie's slate. I thought about James asleep in the armchair with cornbread crumbs on his chin. I'll talk to her, I said. Good, said Ike. I did not talk to her that evening, or the next. I am a man who has always known what he thought and a man who, knowing it, sometimes requires an extra interval to accept that he knows it. I required that interval. What I knew was this: the broken kettle needed a housekeeper. That was a plain fact. What it also needed, and what I had not admitted to myself in 3 years, was something that a housekeeper could not be hired to provide. It needed to be a home again. It needed a woman who understood what a home was, who would make Tomas feel guilty about the kitchen garden and put Ruth's dishes back in the cupboard not because she was paid to, but because she understood that dishes are meant to be used. And I sat with this word for a long time, in the kitchen at night when the house was quiet. I needed to be known again. To be a man that someone in his own house knew. That is a strange need to name. I had not named it before. But it was there and had been there for 3 years, and I had been calling it other things. The question was what Clara Voss needed, and that was not mine to assume. I talked to her on a Thursday evening. The children were in their room. We were in the kitchen, which was the room where everything happened on the broken kettle in those days. I want to offer you a proper arrangement, I said. I had rehearsed this and I said it baldly, which was not how I had rehearsed it. Full housekeeper's wages, the quarters kept, and a place here as long as you want one, for you and the children both. She was quiet for a moment. That's a fair offer, she said. There's a second part. She waited. I'm not only looking to hire a housekeeper, I said. I'm a man who needs a wife and this house needs a mother. I know that's a harder thing to say and a harder thing to hear. I'm not asking for an answer now. I'm asking you to know that's the direction I'm thinking, so you can make your choices knowing it. Another quiet. She looked at her hands, which were folded on the table, then at me. You barely know me, she said. I know how you fed your children before you fed yourself, I said. I know how you read a stranger to decide if he's safe. I know how you went around a man's grief and put his dead wife's dishes back where they belonged without making a production of it. And I know that your daughter does her own accounts because you taught her that a woman who can't do that is at the mercy of men who can. I stopped. I know enough. She looked at me for a long time. I am not a woman who does things she hasn't thought through, she said. I know that too. Give me a week. Take all the time you need, I said. She gave me a week. On the 9th day she told me yes. She told me simply in the kitchen, early in the morning before the children were up. She said, I've thought it through. I want to be clear on one thing, which is that I am saying yes because I want to, not because I have no other choice. I have choices. I'm choosing this one. I know, I said. That's the only way I'd want it. She nodded, then yes. I put out my hand. She took it. We stood in the kitchen in the morning light and held hands like two people who have come to the end of a long road and are deciding, mutually and clear-headed, to walk the next one together. It was, I think, the most honest moment of my adult life. We were married in December, before the worst of the winter settled in the Harrow Crossing church with Ike Prout as witness, and Tomas standing in the back grinning so wide his face looked like it might give way. James wore his best shirt. which Clara had patched at both elbows with cloth from her own coat. Nettie wore a ribbon that Tomas had ridden to Harrow Crossing the previous week to buy, without telling anyone he was going to do it. It was not a large ceremony. It was not a showy one. We said the words and the minister said the words and we signed the register and that was it. Clara's hand in mine in the cold church, her breath visible in the air. Nettie at her side holding James's hand so he wouldn't fidget, and the look on Nettie's face as she watched her mother, not the measuring look, not the watchful waiting look. Something else. Something that took me a moment to name. Relief. The child was relieved. That sat in me for a long time after. I should tell you about Cutter, because he came in January, and that is part of the story too. Harlan Cutter was the man who had held the lease on the Voss claim and had sent his men to evict Clara after Elias died. He was a Harrow County man, a land speculator in the respectable sense. He held leases and mortgages on 6 or 7 small operations east of town, and he was not a villain in the theatrical sense, just a man who valued paper over people and had never found any cost to doing so. He came to the Broken Kettle on a Wednesday in January with 2 of his men, riding without an appointment, which I found discourteous. He had heard the marriage news traveled fast in Harrow County, and he had come, he said, to speak to Mrs. Holt about a matter related to the Voss claim. I told him Mrs. Holt was occupied, and asked what matter he meant. He said there was a question of some of Elias Voss's tools and equipment that had been left on the claim property and which he now held as part of the reversion. He understood Mrs. Voss. He used the old name deliberately. I noted, might feel she had a claim on them. He was willing to discuss a settlement. Those tools were purchased by Elias Voss with his own money, I said. They were on lease property, Cutter said. The lease terms are clear. The lease terms may be clear, I said. I'd suggest you have a lawyer look at them again, specifically the section that distinguishes fixtures from chattels, before you ride another 20 miles to tell my wife what she may or may not own. Cutter looked at me. He was a man who had not been answered that way in some time. You could see it in the slight stiffening of him, the recalibration. I'm not here to make trouble, he said. I know you're not, I said. You're here because you hold paper on a lot of small operations in this county, and you've learned that the people who hold that paper can usually be pushed. Mrs. Holt is not a woman who can be pushed. She's also no longer a woman alone. So I'd suggest we end this conversation here, and if you have a legitimate legal claim you can bring it through the proper channel in Harrow Crossing, and we'll answer it there. A long pause. Cutter looked at his hands, the way a man looks at his hands when he is deciding something. Elias Voss's tools, he said, would amount to maybe $40. Then bring a $40 legal claim, I said. I'll be there. He didn't bring the claim. He rode back to town and we never heard about the tools again. Maybe he'd looked at the lease terms and found what I'd suspected, that Elias Voss had been careful enough, or lucky enough, in the way he'd worded things. Maybe Cutter just decided $40 wasn't worth the cost of a fight with a man who owned the largest ranch in the county. Either way he went, and Clara's husband's tools, a good set of farrier's iron, a frame saw, 3 drawknives, came to the Broken Kettle in February on a wagon from a neighbor of the old claim who had been keeping them safe. Clara received them without comment. She had them stored in the workshop, clean, oiled, laid out on the shelf in a way that told me she had thought about where they should go. The next morning I found a farrier's knife on my workbench with a note in her hand. This one was always too light for Elias. Might suit you. It did. The winter was long and it was good. Not easy. Long winters on the high desert are not easy, but good in the way that a full house is good. The way that noise and warmth and the smell of food and the sound of children are good, when a man has gone without them long enough to know the difference. James decided before Christmas that I was called Gid, not Mr. Holt, and nothing could be done about it. He informed me of this with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child who has classified you and filed you correctly and sees no reason for further discussion. I found I didn't mind. Ike, who had been called Ike his whole life and had an opinion about the informality of nicknames, minded on principle for about a week and then gave it up. Nettie was slower. She called me Mr. Holt until February, and then one evening I was helping her with a long division problem that had defeated her, and I had found the error, a transposition in the third step, and shown her where the carrying had gone wrong. She looked up at me when the problem came out right and said, "Thank you, Gid." Just like that, as if she'd been considering it a long time and had reached a conclusion. I didn't say anything. I moved to the next problem. But I felt it, the way you feel the ice going out on a creek in spring. That sound, that sudden opening up. Clara was not an easy woman. I want to say that clearly, because the version of this story where I took in a grateful woman, and she was grateful, is not the right version, and it dishonors her. She had opinions. She expressed them. She had organized the household along lines that made complete sense to her, and she was right about most of them. And on the occasions when she was right and I disagreed anyway, she made her case with a clarity and a firmness that I came to understand was the same firmness that had kept her walking 20 miles of desert road with 2 children and nothing in her hands. We argued about the kitchen garden expansion in March. She wanted to take ground from the south paddock. I wanted to run the stock through that paddock in spring. We argued about Nettie's schooling, which was limited in Harrow Crossing, and which Clara thought was not good enough, and I thought the same but didn't yet have a solution. We argued once about Elias Voss, not about him exactly, but about the space he occupied. I had said something clumsy, I don't remember exactly what, something that implied a comparison, and Clara had looked at me with level eyes and said, "Elias was a good man and a good husband, and I will always say so. You are a different man, and this is a different life, and I want both to be true without having to choose." I thought about that for a day. Then I said, "You're right, I'm sorry." She accepted the apology the way she accepted most things, without fuss, without revisiting it. It was done, and then it was done. That was the winter. Arguments and reconciliations, and the long evenings by the fire and James's running commentary on everything that happened in the yard and Nettie's slate, and the sound of Clara moving in the kitchen in the early morning before anyone else was up. The particular sound of another person in a house that has been empty too long. Ruth's chair at the table had someone in it again. Not Ruth, Clara was herself, entirely herself every day. But the chair was not empty. The house was not empty. I was not empty, which I had forgotten for 3 years was a thing I could be. Spring came hard and fast that year, the way it comes on the high desert. 1 week of frozen ground and the next week mud, and then the grass coming in on the North Flats like it had been waiting its whole life for permission. We put the kitchen garden in on the south paddock. Clara was right about the ground. I moved the stock to the east pasture and it worked out fine, and I told her so, which she received with a small smile and the complete lack of surprise of a woman who had known she was right all along and was too dignified to say so. James learned to ride in May. Ike taught him on the gentlest horse in the remuda, a gray mare named Tuesday who had carried Ike's previous boss's grandchildren before that man sold the ranch, and who had the patience of a stone. James was, Ike told me, a natural, no-fear, good balance, the instinct to move with the horse rather than against it. I watched them from the fence, this round of a Sunday afternoon when the work was light. James on Tuesday, Ike walking beside, both of them absolutely serious about the business of walking a circuit of the paddock. The look on the boy's face, the concentration, the effort, the brief pure flash of triumph when Tuesday responded to his direction. Clara stood beside me at the fence. "He's been asking about that since November," she said. "I know. Elias was going to teach him," she said quietly. Not with grief, with the plainness of a fact that is what it is. "Ike's a better teacher than me," I said. He has more patience." She didn't say anything to that. She watched her son on his gray mare. I watched too, and I thought about the particular way a thing can fill a space that you had not known was empty when you had been telling yourself the space wasn't there. It was Nettie, in the end, who said the thing I had not found words for. This was in June, early summer, the long evenings when the light held until 8 o'clock and the mesa turned the color of old iron against the sunset sky. We were on the porch, all four of us, the way we'd taken to spending evenings when the work was done, and James had fallen asleep in the rope chair the way he always did, suddenly and completely, the way children go. Clara was mending something. I was doing nothing, which I had slowly, over the course of that winter and spring, learned to do again without the feeling that I was failing at it. Nettie was reading. She closed her book and looked out at the mesa and then at me. "Gid," she said. "I'm glad you opened the gate." I looked at her. She was looking at the mesa, her face still, in the clear, unguarded way of a child who has decided that something is true and has said it without calculation. "So am I said. She nodded, as if that settled something, and opened her book again. Clara had not looked up from her mending, but in the evening light I could see the line of her mouth, and it had changed. The firmness of it had gentled into something that was, if you were close enough and looking, a smile. We sat on the porch until the light went, the four of us, and James slept in his chair, and the mesa turned black against a sky full of stars. And I thought about a gate and a woman on a road, and what it costs a man to open something he has been keeping shut. Less than I'd thought. That was what I'd found out. It costs less than you think, and it gives back more than you know to ask for. 8 years now. James is 13 and half a head taller than his mother, and working the cattle with the men on weekends. And when he graduates from the schoolhouse in Harrow Crossing next spring, Clara has arranged, through a correspondence that has been going on for 2 years, with a school in Flagstaff that Ike told her about, for him to sit the entrance examination for their agricultural program. He will pass it. He is Elias Voss's son in his steadiness and Clara's son in his brain, and I do not take credit for any of it except to say that I was the man who opened the gate and got out of the way while those things grew. Nettie teaches at the Harrow Crossing School now, the same school she attended. She is 22 and she will not be there long, not because she is leaving, but because the county board has been talking to her about a supervisory position and she has opinions about it, which she expresses with the same level clarity her mother uses. She still does her own accounts. The children she teaches do their own accounts, every one of them. Clara is in the kitchen garden this morning. I can see her from the window where I'm writing this. She is staking the tomatoes that the spring wind came through last week and flattened, and she is talking to them while she does it, which she claims she doesn't do, and Tomas, and I have witnessed 40 times. Tomas retired 4 years ago to his sister in Flagstaff, and we have a new cook now, a young man who is competent and who Clara is civilizing with the same quiet efficiency she applied to the house and the kitchen garden, and I suppose to me. Ruth's dishes are in the cupboard. They have been in use for 8 years now. That is where dishes belong. The mesa is pink in the morning light. The cattle are on the north flats. The gate at the south fence stands open. We took the latch off years ago, Clara's idea, because she said a gate that's always open doesn't need a latch. She was right about that, the way she was right about most things. I have told this story better than I told it to Ike. I think. He is not here to correct me, but I believe I have told it true, which is the thing that matters. A woman on a desert road, 2 tired children, and a man on a horse who almost rode past and then didn't. That is the whole of it. A gate opened, a family made, a house that had stopped being a home and was one again. Some things are that simple and that hard, and I would not trade 1 hard inch of it.